I agreed to be a stranger to protect my wife's image at her office party. I stole the spotlight, secured a deal with her boss, and let her panic. She said it would hurt her career if people saw us together. That conversation happened 3 hours before we left for the event, and I'm still processing how casually she threw our marriage under the bus for office politics. We were getting ready when she dropped this bomb. She was putting on her makeup, looking at herself in the mirror instead of at me when she said it. No discussion, no asking what I thought, just a command, like I was some embarrassing relative she had to manage. "Why would knowing your husband hurt your career?" I asked, keeping my voice level. She turned around with that look she gets when she thinks I'm being difficult. "You wouldn't understand the dynamics at my office. There are certain expectations for advancement, and being seen as too domestic doesn't help." Too domestic. That's what our marriage was to her, a liability. So, what exactly are you asking me to do? Just keep your distance tonight. Don't introduce yourself as my husband. If someone asks, you're just a friend of a friend who came along. It's just for tonight. I could have argued. I could have pointed out how ridiculous it sounded. Instead, I decided to give her exactly what she wanted. If she wanted distance, she'd get distance. If she wanted to pretend we were strangers, then strangers we'd be. "Fine," I said. "But understand that goes both ways. If you don't know me, then I don't know you either." She looked relieved, like she'd been worried I'd make a scene. "Thank you for understanding." Understanding? No. I was just choosing my battles more carefully than she realized. The party was at some upscale hotel downtown. Her company had rented out the entire top floor for their annual celebration. As we walked in together, she immediately put space between us and headed toward her work friends while I went to the bar. I watched her transform. The woman, who'd been stressed about mortgage payments that morning, was now laughing loudly at jokes that weren't funny, touching arms during conversations, and flipping her hair like she was 25 and single again. She introduced herself to new people without mentioning a husband at home. When colleagues asked about her personal life, she kept it vague, just focusing on my career right now. Meanwhile, I ordered a beer and started observing the room. The party was full of executives, senior management, and their families. I recognized her boss from the photos she'd shown me, a distinguished man in his 50s who commanded respect just by walking into conversations. What caught my attention was how effortlessly people approached me once I started talking. Maybe it was because I wasn't trying to impress anyone, or maybe it was because I actually listened when people spoke instead of waiting for my turn to talk. A woman approached me at the bar, mid-20s, confident, well-dressed. "I don't think we've met. I'm the boss's daughter. Just graduated from business school. Nice to meet you. What kind of business are you looking to get into?" We talked for 20 minutes about market trends, investment strategies, and her plans to start her own consulting firm. She was sharp, ambitious, and genuinely interesting to talk to, more interesting than the conversation I'd had with my wife about hiding our marriage. Across the room, I could see my wife glancing over occasionally. Her expression shifted from casual interest to something that looked like concern. But she'd made the rules clear. We didn't know each other tonight. The boss's daughter excused herself to get another drink, and I found myself in conversation with a group of senior executives who were discussing expansion plans for the next quarter. They were surprised by my insights into their industry, and the conversation flowed naturally. "You should be working in business development," one of them said. "What do you do now?" Before I could answer, my wife's boss joined the group. He'd been listening and seemed genuinely impressed. "I couldn't help but overhear your thoughts on market positioning. That's exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need more of." My wife was close enough to hear this exchange. I could see her in my peripheral vision. Her body language had completely changed. She was no longer the carefree single woman from earlier. Now she looked like someone watching a situation spiral beyond her control. "Are you here with anyone tonight?" the boss asked me directly. I glanced toward my wife, who was staring at us with wide eyes. She'd created this situation. She'd established the rules. Now she got to watch me follow them perfectly. "No," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I came alone." The boss smiled and extended his hand for a proper introduction. "Well, any friend of the company is welcome here. I'm impressed by your business acumen. We should talk more." What happened next surprised even me. The conversation naturally expanded to include 3 other department heads who had overheard our discussion about emerging markets. Within minutes, I was the center of a business strategy conversation that was far more engaging than anything happening at the other clusters around the room. Your perspective on digital transformation is refreshing, said the VP of Operations. Most consultants we hire just regurgitate the same presentations. You're thinking like an owner, not an advisor. I noticed my wife positioning herself closer to our group, probably trying to hear what was being discussed. She'd grab a drink nearby, then linger, pretending to check her phone. The irony was thick. She'd banished me to avoid looking domestic, but now I was the most interesting person at her office party. The boss's daughter returned with fresh drinks and rejoined our conversation seamlessly. Dad, you found someone who actually understands market dynamics. We were just discussing startup capital allocation strategies. Were you now? The boss looked between us with approval. She's got an MBA from Northwestern and usually intimidates people with her business talk. You're holding your own. She laughed. He's not intimidated by much. I'd guess that comment carried weight. She was right. I wasn't intimidated by her intelligence, her father's position, or the fact that this entire room represented the professional world my wife desperately wanted to climb. I was just having a conversation with interesting people. My wife tried a different approach. She joined a conversation happening near us, speaking loudly enough that we'd overhear her talking about quarterly projections and client retention strategies. It was obvious she was trying to demonstrate her own business knowledge, but it came across as forced compared to the natural flow of our discussion. Your wife seems very dedicated to her work, the boss's daughter said quietly, having clearly figured out the situation despite my earlier denial. Does she? I responded with a slight smile. I wouldn't know. We haven't been introduced. The boss's daughter studied my face for a moment, then smiled back. Fair enough. Should we continue discussing your thoughts on venture capital trends? For the next hour, I found myself genuinely enjoying the evening. The executives were sharp, the boss's daughter was engaging, and the conversations were stimulating in ways that reminded me why I used to love business networking events. My wife, meanwhile, had worked her way through half the party, clearly trying to position herself as indispensable to every conversation. But there's a difference between trying to impress people and naturally commanding their attention. She was trying. I wasn't even attempting to impress anyone, which somehow made the impression stronger. You know what? The boss said during a brief lull in conversation. We're always looking for strategic consultants with real-world perspective. Do you have a business card? I pulled out my card and handed it to him. My wife was close enough to see the exchange, and I watched her face go pale. This wasn't part of her plan. Excellent. Let's schedule a proper meeting next week. We're launching a new division and could use someone with your analytical approach. The boss's daughter touched my arm lightly. And I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on emerging markets. Maybe we could continue this conversation over coffee sometime. Before I could respond, my wife appeared beside us, like she'd materialized out of thin air. Hi, sorry to interrupt. I work in the marketing department. The boss looked at her with polite recognition. Of course, you're on Johnson's team. How are you enjoying the party? It's wonderful. I couldn't help but notice you were having an interesting business discussion. There was an awkward pause. She was clearly fishing for an invitation into the conversation, but she'd spent the entire night establishing that we were strangers. Now she wanted access to the connections I was making, but she couldn't claim any relationship to me without contradicting her own rules. The boss's daughter saved the moment with professional grace. We were just discussing market opportunities in the tech sector, always fascinating to get different perspectives. My wife smiled tightly and nodded, but she was clearly struggling with how to insert herself into a conversation I was leading with people she wanted to impress. She'd created a situation where she couldn't acknowledge knowing me, which meant she couldn't leverage any connection to join the discussion naturally. Well, I should probably mingle with the other guests, she said finally, her voice carrying a hint of desperation that only I would recognize. As she walked away, the boss's daughter leaned closer to me. Your friend seems very ambitious. Some people work harder at appearing valuable than actually being valuable. The truth was starting to become clear to everyone in that conversation circle, even if nobody was saying it directly. The boss pulled me aside 20 minutes later. I meant what I said about that consulting opportunity. Your analysis of our market positioning challenges was spot on. How quickly could you put together a proposal? What time frame are we talking about? I'd like to see something by Friday. We're making strategic decisions about the new division next week, and your approach could be exactly what we need. This was moving faster than I'd expected. A legitimate business opportunity was developing while my wife played her invisible marriage game across the room. I can have a preliminary assessment ready by Wednesday, I told him. Perfect. Here's my direct number. He handed me his business card. Call tomorrow and we'll set up a proper meeting. As he walked away, his daughter appeared again. Dad doesn't hand out his direct number to just anyone. You've clearly made an impression. Your father runs a sharp operation. It shows in the quality of people he surrounds himself with. She smiled at the compliment. Flattery will get you everywhere. Speaking of which, that coffee conversation I mentioned, are you free Thursday afternoon? There's a place downtown that does excellent espresso. And I'd genuinely like to pick your brain about some business concepts. I was about to respond when I noticed my wife approaching again. This time she looked more determined, like she'd spent the last 20 minutes working up courage for something. Excuse me, she said, interrupting our conversation. I'm sorry, but could I borrow you for just a moment? She was looking directly at me. The boss's daughter raised an eyebrow. I'm sorry. Do you two know each other? My wife's face went through several expressions rapidly. She'd backed herself into a corner. If she said yes, she'd have to explain why she'd been pretending we were strangers all night. If she said no, she had no reason to be pulling me away. We met earlier tonight, she said weakly. Actually, I said, looking directly at my wife, I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm sorry, but I don't know you well enough to step away from this conversation. The boss's daughter watched this exchange with growing amusement. She was clearly intelligent enough to read between the lines. My wife's mouth opened, then closed. She'd created this rule system, and now she was trapped inside it. I thought maybe what? I asked calmly. Did you need something specific? She stood there for a moment, realizing that any explanation would require admitting she'd lied about our relationship. Finally, she muttered something about mistaking me for someone else and walked away. The boss's daughter watched her retreat. That was interesting. She seemed very invested in getting your attention for someone who doesn't know you. Some people have strong opinions about conversations they're not part of. True, but back to Thursday. Are you available? Thursday works perfectly. She pulled out her phone. Great. Give me your number and I'll text you the details. As I was entering my contact information, I could feel eyes on me from across the room. My wife was standing with her work friends, but her attention was completely focused on watching me exchange numbers with the boss's daughter. The evening continued to unfold in ways that clearly weren't part of her original plan. Other executives approached me throughout the night, drawn by the conversations they had witnessed earlier. Word was spreading that there was someone at the party worth talking to about business and that someone wasn't from their company. My wife made several more attempts to position herself near these conversations, but each time she faced the same problem. She couldn't claim any connection to me without admitting she'd been lying all night about our relationship. Around 10 o'clock, I noticed her checking her phone repeatedly and glancing toward the exit. The party was winding down and people were starting to leave. She was probably wondering about logistics for getting home. That's when it hit her. We'd driven to the party together, but according to her rules, we didn't know each other, which meant she had no legitimate reason to expect a ride home with me. I watched the realization dawn on her face from across the room. She started moving toward me with more urgency than she'd shown all evening, but I was already making different plans. The party seems to be wrapping up, the boss's daughter observed. Can I offer you a ride? My car is in the valet area. That's very kind of you. I'd appreciate it. As we moved toward the exit, I saw my wife break away from her group and start walking quickly in our direction. But we were already at the elevator, and the doors were closing. The last thing I saw was her standing in the hallway, finally understanding that following her rules meant accepting all the consequences that came with them. The elevator doors had barely closed when my phone started buzzing text messages, multiple ones. Where are you going? We need to talk. This isn't funny anymore. I showed the screen to the boss's daughter without saying anything. She glanced at it and shook her head with a knowing smile. Someone's having second thoughts about the evening's arrangements. Apparently, the rules only apply when they're convenient. My phone rang, same number. I declined the call and put the phone on silent. You're not going to answer that? I don't take calls from strangers. She laughed, a genuine sound that filled the elevator. You're committed to this approach, aren't you? Consistency is important in business and personal relationships. We reached the lobby and walked toward the valet station. My phone lit up again, this time another call. Same number, same decline. Is she going to keep trying? the boss's daughter asked as we waited for her car. Probably. But that's not really my concern anymore. The valet brought around a sleek BMW, not flashy, but clearly high-end. She tipped him and held the passenger door for me, which was a nice touch. As we pulled away from the hotel, I caught a glimpse of the lobby through the glass doors. My wife was there, talking animatedly to someone at the front desk, probably asking about ride-sharing options or taxi availability. "So," the boss's daughter said as we merged into downtown traffic, "want to tell me what that was really about?" "What do you mean?" "Come on, that woman upstairs. The urgent text messages. The fact that you came to a company party alone, but clearly have some kind of relationship with someone who works there." I'm not stupid. I looked at her profile as she drove sharp features, confident posture, obviously intelligent. She deserved a straight answer. "She's my wife." "Oh," no surprise in her voice. "And she asked you to pretend you didn't know her tonight. She said it would hurt her career if people saw us together. Too domestic for her professional image. So you gave her exactly what she asked for." "Exactly what she asked for." We stopped at a red light and she turned to look at me directly. That must have been difficult. The difficult part was realizing how easily she threw away our marriage for office politics. Following through on her request was actually pretty simple. The light changed and we continued driving. My phone was still lighting up with notifications, but I wasn't checking them anymore. "Where would you like me to drop you?" "Honestly, I'm not in a hurry to get home right now. Is there somewhere we could continue that conversation about market strategies? Maybe grab a drink?" She smiled. "I know just the place." 20 minutes later, we were sitting in a quiet bar downtown, the kind of place that catered to professionals who appreciated good whiskey and actual conversation over loud music and crowds. "Your wife made a strategic error tonight," she said after we had ordered drinks. "How so?" "She was so focused on managing her image that she forgot to actually make an impression. Meanwhile, you walked in with no agenda except to have genuine conversations and ended up being the most memorable person at the party." "I wasn't trying to be memorable." "That's exactly why you were. Authentic confidence is rare. Most people are performing all the time." My phone buzzed again, this time a different number, probably a cab company or rideshare she'd called from the hotel. "Aren't you going to check that? If it's important, they'll leave a message." She raised her glass, to following through on commitments. We clinked glasses. And I realized this was the first genuinely relaxing moment I'd had in months. No tension about money, no walking on eggshells around someone's career anxieties, no pretending to be less than I was to make someone else comfortable. "So about that consulting proposal," she said. "What's your initial assessment of where my father's company could improve?" For the next hour we talked business philosophy and life plans. She was launching her own consulting firm and had insights into market dynamics that most MBA programs never touch. The conversation flowed naturally from professional topics to personal ambitions to shared perspectives on leadership and authenticity. My phone had stopped buzzing around midnight. Either she'd given up trying to reach me or she'd found her own way home. "I should probably get going," I said finally. "Of course, but Thursday still works for that coffee meeting." "Thursday definitely works." As she drove me home, I realized something had shifted tonight, not just in my marriage, but in how I saw myself. I'd spent months accommodating someone who was embarrassed by our relationship, and tonight I'd remembered what it felt like to be valued for who I actually was. She pulled into my driveway at 1:30 a.m. The house was dark except for the porch light. "Thank you for the ride and the conversation. Thank you for making my father's party infinitely more interesting than usual." As I walked toward the front door, her car pulled away quietly. I stood on the porch for a moment, keys in hand, preparing for whatever was waiting inside. The house was silent when I walked in, but I could tell she was awake. There's a particular quality to silence when someone is lying in bed seething versus actually sleeping. The bedroom light was off, but I could see the glow of her phone screen under the door. I took my time getting ready for bed, hung up my suit properly, brushed my teeth, went through my normal routine. No rushing, no tiptoeing, no guilty behavior. I'd done exactly what she'd asked me to do. When I finally entered the bedroom, she was sitting up in bed with her arms crossed, the confrontation pose. "Where were you?" "At the party you invited me to. Don't play dumb. After the party you disappeared." I started unbuttoning my shirt, keeping my movements casual. "I went for drinks with someone I met at the party. Had some interesting business discussions." "Someone you met?" "Who?" "A potential consulting client. We talked about market strategies and professional opportunities." Her voice got sharper. "What kind of consulting client?" "The kind that offers legitimate business opportunities." I hung up my shirt and looked at her directly. Is there something specific you wanted to know? You can't just leave me stranded at my own office party. Stranded. You were surrounded by your colleagues all evening, and according to your rules, we didn't know each other, so I had no obligation to coordinate transportation with a stranger. She opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to realize the logical trap she'd created for herself. That was just for appearances. You knew what I meant. Actually, I didn't know what you meant. You said to pretend we didn't know each other. I followed your instructions perfectly. You're being ridiculous. I sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at her calmly. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You wanted me to hide our marriage to protect your career, I agreed. You wanted distance between us. At the party I gave you distance. You wanted to appear single and unattached to your colleagues. You got exactly that. But now you're upset because I treated you like we were actually strangers. That's not what I wanted. Then you should have been clearer about what you did want. Because from where I sat tonight, it looked like you wanted to flirt with your male colleagues without the inconvenience of a husband nearby. Her face flushed. I was networking. So was I. And apparently, I'm better at it than you thought. She was quiet for a moment, processing that comment. What do you mean? Your boss offered me a consulting contract tonight, wants a proposal by Friday. His daughter and I are meeting Thursday to discuss business opportunities. 3 department heads asked for my contact information. I'd say the networking was pretty successful. I could see her mind racing, trying to calculate what this meant for her position at the company. His daughter, smart woman, Northwestern MBA, starting her own consulting firm. We had a lot to discuss. You exchanged contact information with her, business cards, phone numbers, meeting plans, the usual networking activities. The silence stretched between us. She was realizing that her plan to hide me had backfired spectacularly. Instead of protecting her career, she'd created a situation where I was building independent relationships with the people she wanted to impress. You can't meet with her. Why not? Because you're married. I stood up and walked to the dresser, taking my time to process that statement. Interesting. So now our marriage matters. Now it's relevant to my professional decisions. Don't twist this around. I'm not twisting anything. I'm just trying to understand the rules. Tonight being married to you was harmful to your career, so we were strangers. But now my potential business relationships are limited by our marriage. You can't have it both ways. She got out of bed and walked toward me. This isn't about having it both ways. This is about respect. Respect. I turned to face her fully. You want to talk about respect? You told me to hide in the corner of your professional life because acknowledging our marriage would hurt your advancement. You spent the evening flirting with colleagues while I followed your rules about staying away. And now you're lecturing me about respect? I never flirted with anyone. You introduced yourself as single to multiple people. You touched arms, laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. And when people asked about your personal life, you said you were focusing on your career right now. What exactly would you call that behavior? She didn't have an immediate answer. The difference is, I continued, when I networked tonight, I was actually discussing business. When you were performing a version of yourself that doesn't include the most important relationship in your life, one of us was being professional. The other was being deceptive. So what happens now? Now you live with the consequences of your choices. I have a business meeting Thursday and a proposal to write this week. Your colleagues see me as a valuable professional contact, not as your embarrassing husband. Isn't that what you wanted? You know that's not what I wanted. Then maybe next time you should think through your requests more carefully before making them. The next morning, she was already gone when I woke up. No coffee made, no note, no acknowledgement of the previous night's conversation. Just her usual passive-aggressive way of handling situations she couldn't control through manipulation. I made my own coffee and started working on the consulting proposal. The boss had given me detailed information about their market challenges, and I could see several strategic approaches that would deliver real value. This wasn't charity or a networking favor. It was legitimate business. My phone rang around 9, her number. We need to talk about last night. I'm working on a business proposal. What specifically did you want to discuss? You can't seriously be considering working with my company. Why not? Your boss made a legitimate offer based on our professional conversation. Because it's my company, my career. You can't just insert yourself into my professional life. I set down my pen and leaned back in my chair. Let me understand this logic. Last night our marriage was so damaging to your career that I had to pretend to be a stranger. Today, my independent business relationship with your company is somehow inserting myself into your professional life. That's different. How is it different? Long pause. Because you're doing this to get back at me. I'm doing this because your boss offered me a consulting contract and I'm qualified to deliver the work. Your paranoia about my motivations says more about your guilty conscience than about my intentions. My guilty conscience. You spent last night acting single at your office party. You flirted with colleagues, hid our marriage, and treated me like an embarrassing secret. Now you're worried that working with your company might reveal details about your personal life that you've been hiding from your boss. Silence on the other end of the line. The consulting work has nothing to do with our marriage, I continued. But your panic about it tells me you've been misrepresenting yourself to your colleagues in ways that could become problematic if they knew the truth. I haven't misrepresented anything, really. So your boss knows you're married? Your colleagues know you have a husband at home? Because last night it seemed like you'd gone to great lengths to present yourself as unattached and available. More silence. Here's what's going to happen, I said, using the tone I reserved for non-negotiable decisions. I'm completing this consulting proposal because it's good business. I'm meeting with the boss's daughter Thursday because we have legitimate professional interests to discuss. And you're going to accept that your decision to hide our marriage created a situation where I'm now independent of your career concerns. You can't do this. I'm not doing anything to you. I'm pursuing professional opportunities with people who value my expertise. If that threatens your position at work, then maybe you should have thought about that before asking me to pretend we were strangers. What about our marriage? What about it? Last night you made it clear that our marriage was a liability to your career. Today you're claiming it should limit my business opportunities. You're trying to use our relationship as both a weapon and a shield, depending on what serves your interests in the moment. I could hear her breathing on the other end, probably trying to formulate an argument that would put her back in control. I want you to cancel the meeting with her. That's not going to happen. Why not? Because you don't get to make demands about my professional relationships after spending an evening hiding our personal relationship. You created this dynamic where we operate as independent individuals. Now you live with it. This is ridiculous. What's ridiculous is thinking you could have complete control over how our marriage affects your career without any impact on how your career affects our marriage. Thursday arrived and I met the boss's daughter at the coffee shop. She'd recommended professional atmosphere, good coffee, and 2 hours of substantive discussion about business strategy and market opportunities. She was impressive, sharp analytical mind, clear vision for her consulting firm, and genuine interest in collaboration rather than competition. We discussed potential partnership opportunities that could benefit both our professional goals. Your insights into operational efficiency are exactly what my target clients need, she said as we wrapped up the meeting. Would you be interested in a strategic partnership? I handle client acquisition and relationship management. You provide analytical expertise and strategic planning. That sounds like a solid foundation for collaboration. Excellent. I'll draft a partnership outline this week. As we shook hands outside the coffee shop, she mentioned something that caught my attention. By the way, my father was very impressed with your proposal. He's planning to recommend you to the board for the consulting contract should be approved by next week. I appreciate his confidence in the work. He also mentioned how professional you were at the party, she added. Said it's rare to meet someone who can separate personal complications from business opportunities. That evening, my wife was waiting when I got home. She'd clearly spent the day working herself up for this conversation. How was your meeting? Productive. We're exploring a business partnership. A partnership? Strategic consulting collaboration. She handles client relationships. I provide analytical services. Good fit for both our skill sets. Her face went through several emotions rapidly. You can't be serious. Dead serious. It's a smart business move. What about us? What about our marriage? I sat down across from her at the kitchen table, time for the conversation that should have happened months ago. Our marriage will survive or fail based on whether we respect each other, not based on whether I avoid business opportunities that make you uncomfortable. Last night you made it clear that acknowledging our marriage was harmful to your goals. Today you want our marriage to limit my goals. That's not how partnerships work. So what are you saying? I'm saying you need to decide whether you want a marriage or a career accessory, because I'm done being treated like a liability you manage instead of a partner you respect. She stared at me for a long moment. And if I don't like your new business arrangements, Then you'll have to decide what matters more to you, controlling my choices or accepting that I'm going to pursue opportunities that advance my own goals, just like you did at that party. This isn't over. You're right, it's not. But the rules have changed, and this time we're both going to follow them.